For a decade, she weaponized the judgment of her community. She was the arbiter of honor, the gatekeeper of tradition, the one whose whisper could build a reputation or tear it down. She never dreamed that one day, that very weapon, honed to a razor's edge by her own hand, would be turned against her. For 10 long years, Sahna Singh held her neighborhood in the palm of her hand, basking in the respect and fear she commanded. But the ground beneath her feet was shifting, and a reckoning was coming, not from a television producer or a rebellious daughter-in-law, but from the very people she thought she controlled. This isn't just a recap. This is the story the cameras never dared to show you. This is the exclusive inside story you will not find anywhere else. We have sources on the ground, people who were there, who have been feeding us information that completely changes everything you thought you knew about the Singh family saga. If you want the unfiltered truth, the kind that network television is too scared to air, then you need to do 3 things right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and most importantly, ring that notification bell. Because what I'm about to lay out is a conspiracy of silence that has finally been broken, and you are not going to want to miss a single shocking detail. The story of Sahna's downfall is a masterclass in karmic justice, and it starts not with a bang, but with a speech. To understand the sheer magnitude of Sahna's public shaming, we have to first rewind and appreciate the pedestal she had built for herself. This wasn't just a woman, she was an institution. In her community, a tight-knit enclave of families who had known each other for generations, Sahna was the sun around which all social planets revolved. Her approval was the currency of acceptance. A new bride was not truly welcomed into the fold until she had received a nod of approval from Sahna at a community gathering. A young man's new business venture was not considered legitimate until Sahna had either praised it or, at the very least, chosen not to criticize it. She was the chief consultant on everything from wedding arrangements to the proper way to discipline a child, a self-appointed guardian of a culture she believed only she truly understood. She wielded this power with the precision of a surgeon. A subtle glance of disapproval at a woman's dress could lead to weeks of gossip. A comment, seemingly off the cuff, about a family's financial decisions could damage their standing for months. She mastered the art of the backhanded compliment, the concerned inquiry that was actually a veiled accusation. For years, this was her kingdom, and her son's controversial choice of a foreign wife was the ultimate act of treason. When the television cameras arrived, they didn't just document a family conflict, they amplified Sahna's power. Suddenly, her pronouncements weren't just local gossip, they were broadcast to millions. She became the face of tradition, the righteous mother fighting to preserve her family's honor against a tide of Western influence. She reveled in the role, playing it to the hilt. She saw the cameras not as an intrusion, but as a megaphone for her judgment, a global stage for her personal crusade. But this is where our insider reports begin to paint a very different picture. While the show portrayed a community united behind Sahna, our sources tell us a slow, simmering resentment was building for years. At first, the neighbors were intrigued by the television production. It was a novelty, a bit of excitement in their quiet lives. They were happy to support Sahna, a woman they had always, if grudgingly, respected. But the novelty soon wore off. The constant presence of film crews became an irritation. Production vans blocked driveways, bright lights shone into windows at odd hours. Private conversations were interrupted by sound booms. Neighbors were constantly being asked to sign release forms, to be mindful of what they said, to essentially become unpaid extras in the Sahna Singh show. The real poison, however, was the content of that show. The community began to see how they were being portrayed. The endless circular arguments, the tearful confrontations, the constant rehashing of the same grievances, it was all being broadcast as a reflection of them. They were a peaceful, hardworking community, proud of their heritage but also modern and forward-thinking. Yet, on television, their neighborhood was becoming synonymous with dysfunction and chaos. Our sources describe a series of private meetings, hushed conversations over tea, and messages exchanged in closed social media groups. The consensus was growing. Sahna was not protecting their community's honor, she was dragging it through the mud for a television paycheck. She wasn't a noble matriarch, she was the star of a psychodrama, and the entire neighborhood was her unwilling supporting cast. The breaking point, the moment the silent rebellion became a public coup, was the annual community festival. This wasn't just a party, it was the most important social event of the year, a celebration of their shared culture and history. It was a day of unity, of vibrant colors, of music and food and genuine camaraderie. And it was, for Sahna, the ultimate stage. She always made a grand entrance, dressed in her finest silk sari, expecting and receiving the deference of a queen. This year, however, something was different. Our eyewitnesses on the ground reported that as Sahna made her way through the crowd, the usual chorus of reverent greetings was muted. The smiles didn't quite reach people's eyes. Conversations would awkwardly pause as she approached, then resume a little too quickly after she passed. It was a subtle chill, a collective coolness that Sahna, in her arrogance, initially failed to register. She assumed her usual position of prominence near the stage, ready to observe and, of course, to judge. The festival's formal program was usually a predictable affair. Songs from the children, a dance performance, and a few words from the community association president. But this year, an unscheduled speaker was invited to the stage. It was Mrs. Gupta, a woman in her late 70s, the true quiet elder of the community. Mrs. Gupta was everything Sahna was not. She rarely spoke in public, never sought the spotlight, and her authority came not from fear, but from a lifetime of quiet dignity, wisdom, and kindness. When she took the microphone, a hush fell over the entire park. This was unprecedented. Everyone knew something significant was about to happen. We have obtained exclusive cell phone footage of this moment, a video that is now being circulated in private community groups like a forbidden text. The quality is shaky, but the audio is crystal clear. Mrs. Gupta began by speaking about the beauty of their community, the strength of their shared bonds. Then her tone shifted. Without ever mentioning a single name, she launched into a speech that was a masterclass in targeted destruction. "We often speak of family honor," she began, her voice steady and strong, resonating through the speakers. "We are taught that it is a precious thing, something to be protected at all costs. But I ask you, what is true honor? Is it found in rigid pride? Is it found in closing our hearts to those who are different?" A murmur went through the crowd. Every single person knew exactly what she was talking about. All eyes, almost as if pulled by a magnetic force, began to subtly shift towards Sahna. "A true matriarch," Mrs. Gupta continued, her gaze sweeping across the audience but seemingly piercing right through to Sahna, "is a banyan tree, providing shade and shelter for all, even the shoots that grow in unexpected directions. Her strength is in her grace. Her honor is in her acceptance. She unites her family. She does not tear it apart for the world to see." The phrase "for the world to see" landed like a hammer blow. It was the confirmation. This was about the show. This was about the endless televised drama. Sahna's face, as seen in the footage, began to change. The serene, regal mask was cracking. A flicker of confusion, then dawning horror, appeared in her eyes. She looked around, seeking validation, seeking an ally, but all she saw were the faces of her neighbors, now turned fully towards her, their expressions a mixture of pity, agreement, and cold, hard judgment. And then Mrs. Gupta delivered the final, devastating sentence. "Endless public drama, my friends, brings more shame to a family than any unconventional marriage ever could. True disgrace is not in who our children choose to love. True disgrace is in sacrificing our peace, our privacy, and our community's good name for the sake of being right." The silence that followed was more damning than any shout could have been. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with a decade of unspoken resentment. In that moment, Sahna's entire world collapsed. It wasn't just a speech, it was a verdict, a public sentencing. The respected elder had spoken, and in doing so, had given the entire community permission to finally unleash the judgment they had been holding back for years. The social power she had so carefully cultivated and brutally wielded had been reversed, amplified, and aimed directly at her heart. The footage shows Sahna standing frozen for a few seconds, her face a pale mask of shock. Then she turned and walked away, not with her usual regal stride, but with the hurried, head-down pace of someone who has been utterly and completely defeated. No one stopped her. No one said a word. They just watched her go, the woman who was once their queen, now a pariah in her own kingdom. This event, which we can now exclusively confirm, was not a spontaneous outburst. Our insider theory, pieced together from multiple sources, is that this was a carefully orchestrated move, planned for weeks by a core group of influential community members, including the younger generation who were fed up with the caricature their community had become. They knew a direct confrontation would just create more drama for the cameras. They needed to do something symbolic, something undeniable. They chose Mrs. Gupta as their voice because her integrity was unimpeachable. Her words weren't gossip, they were wisdom. They chose the festival because it was the one place Sahna could not escape the collective gaze of her peers. It was a strategic social coup d'etat. The community's patience had not just snapped, it had been ground down to nothing. They were tired of the Singh family's endless psychodrama being their primary cultural export. They saw Sahna not as a righteous defender of tradition, but as a source of constant toxic conflict. She had invited cancer into their lives, the cancer of reality television, and then blamed everyone but herself for the symptoms. The very social pressure she used to control her son, to intimidate her daughter-in-law, had now mutated into a monstrous force she could no longer control. The theory was now proven real. The community had turned. The days and weeks following the festival were a slow, agonizing education for Sahna in what it truly means to be powerless. The reckoning had begun, and it was playing out in the mundane arenas of her daily life. Her ultimate power source, her social standing, was being systematically dismantled, not with loud confrontations, but with the quiet, brutal efficiency of communal shunning. The first test was the local market, her weekly stage. For years, her trip to the market was a royal procession. Vendors would call out to her, offering her the best product. Other shoppers would part to let her through, stopping her for a bit of conversation, hoping for a sliver of her attention. Our source, a shopkeeper who has known Sahna for over 20 years, described the scene to us in a private message. Sahna arrived at her usual time, attempting to project an air of normalcy, as if the festival had never happened. But the market's delicate social ecosystem had been rewritten. Her usual vegetable vendor, a man who typically saved the best mangoes for her, suddenly became intensely focused on sorting his onions, refusing to meet her eye. He served 3 other customers, all of whom had arrived after Sahna, before he finally, reluctantly acknowledged her. His words were clipped, professional. Yes, what do you need? There was no good morning, Sahna ji, no friendly banter, just cold commerce. As she moved through the market, a strange phenomenon occurred. A bubble of silence and space formed around her. People didn't glare or whisper loudly. They simply erased her. They would turn their backs to look at spices as she approached. They would suddenly find a friend to talk to on the other side of the aisle. They gave her a wide berth, as if she were carrying a contagious disease. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, a collective decision to render her invisible. She, the woman who demanded to be the center of all attention, was now a ghost in her own neighborhood. She left the market that day with her groceries, but also with a profound and chilling understanding that her world had irrevocably changed. Her currency was worthless. Her reign was over. The shunning extended to her social circle, the very women who had formed her court of loyalists. These were the friends she met for tea, the ones she gossiped with, the ones who reinforced her sense of importance. Suddenly, her calls started going to voicemail. Her invitations for lunch were met with polite but vague excuses. So sorry, Sahna. I am busy that day. Another time, perhaps. The children have so many activities right now. These were flimsy, transparent lies, and Sahna knew it. The most painful blow came from Priya, her closest confidant for over 30 years. After a week of unanswered calls, Sahna, in a fit of desperation, went to Priya's house unannounced. Priya answered the door, her face etched with discomfort. She didn't invite Sahna in. They stood there on the doorstep in a horribly awkward silence, until Priya finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Sahna, people are upset. They feel the family's business has become the whole world's business. They feel our community looks foolish. Sahna tried to argue, to defend herself, to fall back on her old rhetoric about honor and tradition. But Priya cut her off, not with anger, but with a weary sadness. It's not about that anymore. It's just too much. It's been too much for too long. People need peace. I need peace. And with that, she gently closed the door, leaving Sahna standing alone on the porch, a stranger at the door of her best friend's house. The isolation was absolute. The phone stopped ringing. The visitors stopped coming. The whispers that used to follow her, whispers of respect and fear, were replaced by a crushing, profound silence. She was effectively excommunicated. This is the part of the story the cameras will never show you, because it's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet and devastating. It's the slow, methodical stripping away of a person's entire identity. Sahna had built her sense of self on the reflection she saw in her community's eyes. She was Sahna the respected, Sahna the matriarch, Sahna the powerful. Now, when she looked for that reflection, she saw nothing, just a void. She was forced, for the first time in her life, into a state of introspection. Alone in her large, silent house, with no one to perform for, no one to judge, she was confronted with the consequences of her decade-long war. The war she had waged against her son's happiness, against her daughter-in-law, had always been, in her mind, a holy war for the soul of her family and her community. She was the hero, the martyr, the one fighting the good fight, but the narrative had been stolen from her. In her community's eyes, she wasn't the hero. She was the villain. She was the one who had brought shame, chaos, and ridicule to their doorsteps. A particularly damning theory that has reached us from our most trusted sources suggests that the community's turn was also fueled by a deep-seated fear of consequences beyond mere reputation. There were whispers of a young couple from the neighborhood who were seeking a marriage alliance with a prominent family in a nearby city. The deal allegedly fell through at the last minute. The other family, after doing their due diligence, had reportedly said they were hesitant to be associated with a community that seemed to be, and this is a direct quote from our source, a television circus. Whether this story is 100% true or a cautionary tale that spread like wildfire, its effect was the same. Sahna's drama was no longer just an embarrassment, it was a tangible liability, potentially affecting the futures of their own children. It was a threat to their collective social and economic well-being. This is the context in which Sahna's reckoning must be understood. It wasn't just a petty squabble. It was a community taking desperate measures to protect itself from a perceived threat within its own walls. They were amputating a limb to save the body. Sahna was that limb. She was forced to replay the events of the past 10 years in her mind, but this time without the self-serving filter of her own righteousness. She saw the constant criticism, the emotional manipulation, the ultimatums. She saw the pain in her son's eyes, the exhaustion in her daughter-in-law's face, and she saw it all playing out on a television screen, magnified and distorted for the entertainment of strangers. She had been so obsessed with the concept of honor, a concept she defined and redefined to suit her own needs. But what had she actually achieved? Her son was estranged, her family was fractured, and now the community whose respect she valued above all else had publicly and decisively rejected her. She hadn't saved her family's honor. She had single-handedly, spectacularly destroyed it. She had incinerated it in the bright, hot glare of the television lights, and all she had left were the ashes. The silence in her house was a mirror, reflecting the stark, undeniable truth. Her crusade had cost her everything she had ever claimed to be fighting for. The great irony, the ultimate karmic justice, was that in her relentless quest to prevent her family from becoming a source of shame, she had become the neighborhood's single greatest disgrace. The weapon of judgment she had wielded for so long had not just been turned against her, it had delivered a mortal wound. And as she sat alone, in the quiet tomb of her own making, Sahna was finally forced to confront the ghost of her own creation. The question was no longer whether she could win her war, but whether she could survive the peace. The community had made its move, and the checkmate was absolute. Her power was gone. Her standing was gone. All that was left was the woman herself, stripped of her titles and her audience, left to contemplate the ruins of a kingdom she herself had brought to ruin. But the story doesn't end there, because when you hit rock bottom, there are only two ways to go. And what Sahna did next, the desperate move she made to try and reclaim her power, is even more shocking than the fall itself. A new chapter of this drama was about to begin, one born not of pride, but of pure, unadulterated desperation. And it would threaten to unleash a new kind of chaos on a community that thought the worst was already over. They had won the battle, but Sahna Singh was about to prove that the war was far from finished. The silence that consumed Sahna Singh's life was not a peaceful one. It was a screaming, roaring void, filled with the ghosts of her former glory. A queen without a court is just a woman in an empty room. And Sahna's room, once the bustling center of her community's universe, had become a prison of her own design. For weeks, she endured the invisible walls, the averted eyes, the crushing weight of her own irrelevance. A lesser person might have broken, might have retreated into a quiet shame. But Sahna Singh was not a lesser person. She was a fighter. She had built her empire on conflict, and in the desolate wasteland of her new reality, her survival instincts kicked in. She had lost the battle for the hearts and minds of her neighbors, but she had not yet lost the war for the narrative. And our insider sources, who have been monitoring the situation with a closeness you will not find anywhere else, have confirmed that Sahna, cornered and desperate, decided to unleash her nuclear option. She reached for the very weapon that had been used against her, the camera. What happens when a puppet master has all her strings cut? She finds a new puppet, or in this case, she tries to become the puppeteer of the very people who created her. Our exclusive reports indicate a flurry of activity in the weeks following Sahna's public humiliation. A series of long, frantic phone calls were made from her landline to a number in Los Angeles, a number belonging to one of the senior producers of the show. This was her desperate gambit. She couldn't win back her community's respect through traditional means, so she decided to bypass them entirely. She went straight to the court of public opinion, a court where she still believed she held some sway. Her plan, as pieced together from various sources close to the production, was as audacious as it was diabolical. She would reframe the entire story. She wasn't the aggressor who had terrorized her family for a decade. She was the victim. She was a traditional mother being persecuted by a modern community that had lost its way. A community jealous of her television fame. She began to feed the producers a narrative so twisted, so self-serving, it was a work of art in its own right. Mrs. Gupta's powerful speech at the festival, according to Sahna's new telling, it wasn't a righteous call for peace. It was a calculated attack orchestrated by a rival family, the Guptas, who had always been envious of the Singh's standing. The community turning their backs on her. It wasn't a consequence of her own actions, it was a cruel, coordinated bullying campaign, a witch hunt against a woman who dared to stand up for her values. She painted a picture of herself as a lonely martyr, a misunderstood Cassandra screaming warnings that no one would heed. She was, in her own words to the producer, being canceled by her own people. The producers, of course, are not in the business of truth. They are in the business of television. And Sahna's new story, the story of a matriarch betrayed, was television gold. It was a new season, a new plot twist, a new enemy. They sent a camera crew back to the neighborhood, but this time with a different mandate. They weren't there to film the Singh family's internal struggles. They were there to film Sahna's war against her entire community. This is where our theory, which feels more like fact with every new piece of information we get, becomes truly chilling. We believe Sahna didn't just report on her isolation, she began to actively produce it. Think about it. The first time she was shunned at the market, it was a genuine, shocking experience. But our sources suggest that subsequent trips, the ones where the cameras just happened to be present, were different. We've heard whispers that Sahna would time her shopping trips to coincide with the crew's arrival. She would walk through the aisles, playing her part to perfection, her face a mask of tragic dignity as people pointedly ignored her. She was no longer just a subject of a reality show. She was its creative director, staging her own suffering for maximum dramatic effect. The cameras captured her lonely walks, her solitary cups of tea in a silent home, the unanswered phone calls she would make on speakerphone for the benefit of the microphone. She was building her case, one carefully curated scene of pathos at a time. To sell this narrative, however, she needed an ally, someone from within the community to validate her story of persecution. Her old friends had abandoned her, but Sahna, ever the strategist, found a weak link. A new family. The Sharmas had recently moved into the neighborhood. They were younger, less established, and according to our sources, completely starstruck by the presence of the television show. They knew Sahna only as the famous woman from TV. Sahna descended upon them like a savior, showering them with attention, gifts, and her own version of the neighborhood's history. She told them horror stories of the gossip, the jealousy, the cliquishness of the other families. She positioned herself as their only true friend, their guide through the treacherous social landscape. In reality, she was grooming them. She was creating her own personal cheering section, a Greek chorus for her televised tragedy. Soon enough, the Sharmas were appearing on camera, telling the producers how wonderful Sahna was, and how they had witnessed firsthand the cruel and unwarranted shunning she was being forced to endure. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, a desperate attempt to build a new, albeit smaller kingdom on the ashes of the old one. The community's reaction was one of stunned disbelief, which quickly morphed into incandescent rage. They had performed a difficult but necessary social surgery, excising the source of the drama that had plagued them for years. They thought they had achieved peace, and now the cameras are back, but this time they were the villains. Crew members began approaching people on the street, in their gardens, outside the temple. We hear there's a campaign of harassment against Sahna Singh. Can you comment? Why has the community decided to bully a respected elder? Sahna feels she is in danger. What is your response? It was a grotesque inversion of the truth. They were being gaslit on an international scale. Mrs. Gupta, the woman who had acted with such quiet dignity, was now being painted as a vindictive ringleader. Her family began receiving hostile messages on social media from viewers who were buying into Sahna's victim narrative. The unity the community had forged in their opposition to Sahna began to show cracks under this new intense pressure. Some people wanted to fight back, to go on camera and tell their side of the story. Others argued that would be falling into Sahna's trap, creating exactly the kind of confrontational drama she and the producers wanted. Old tensions, unrelated to the Singhs, began to resurface. The community had wanted peace, but Sahna, in her desperate final act, had dragged them back into the mud with her. She had engineered a civil war. But here's where the story takes its final, most karmic turn. This is the exclusive you will only get here, based on conversations with people who have seen the raw, unaired footage. Sahna made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed the producers were her allies. She forgot the first rule of reality television: the show is loyal to no one but the story. And as the producers dug deeper into Sahna's narrative of persecution, they started to notice inconsistencies. They were trying to build her up as a saint, but the facts on the ground kept getting in the way. They had hours upon hours of footage from previous years, and when they reviewed it in this new context, they started to see a pattern. They saw her subtle manipulations, her public put-downs, her constant moving of the goalposts. They had always edited it to look like a family drama, but now they saw it for what it was: a reign of social terror. The turning point, our source inside the production reveals, came from an unexpected place. A young man whose family had been neighbors with the Singhs for 15 years approached a producer off the record. His older sister had been engaged to be married years ago, a wonderful match to a good family. But Sahna, for reasons no one ever understood, had taken a dislike to the girl. She started a quiet, insidious rumor campaign. A whisper here about the girl's character, a concerned question there about the family's finances. It was all baseless, but Sahna's word was law. The whispers grew, the doubts festered, and the engagement was broken off. The girl was heartbroken, her reputation unfairly tarnished. The family had suffered in silence, too afraid of Sahna's social power to fight back. Now, seeing Sahna play the victim on television, this young man felt a decade of repressed anger boil over. He told the producer everything. This story was a bombshell. It changed the entire focus of the production. They realized the story wasn't Community Bully's matriarch. The real story, the much more compelling story, was Secret Tyrant Gets Her Comeuppance. The producers, smelling a ratings blockbuster, pivoted. They started a secret parallel investigation. They began reaching out to other families in the community, not with leading questions about Sahna's persecution, but with open-ended inquiries about their history with her. They did it quietly, away from the main camera crew, using junior producers to make the calls. And what they unearthed was a treasure trove of toxicity. A dam of silence broke. One by one, people began to talk. There was the story of the family who started a small catering business from their home, only to have Sahna publicly criticize their hygiene at a party, effectively killing their business before it could even start. There was the story of the newlywed daughter-in-law from another family whom Sahna had ostracized for wearing modern clothing, making her first year of marriage a living hell. Story after story poured in, painting a picture not of a traditionalist, but of a deeply controlling woman who used the shield of culture to justify her own petty cruelties and to maintain her iron grip on the social hierarchy. She wasn't protecting honor, she was hoarding power. Sahna, meanwhile, was completely oblivious. She was still in director mode, staging her lonely scenes, coaching her new allies, the Sharmas, on what to say. She believed she was winning. She was awaiting the airing of her redemption arc, the season where the world would finally see her as the hero she had always believed herself to be. The producers, for their part, played along. They filmed her scenes of victimhood, they listened sympathetically to her complaints, all the while gathering the evidence that would completely annihilate her. The final confrontation was not a public speech or a dramatic showdown in the street. It was something far more intimate and far more brutal. The producers arranged for what Sahna believed would be her final, triumphant interview of the season. It was to be her moment to sum up her pain, to speak her truth to the world. They sat her down in her own living room, the lights set up, the cameras rolling. The lead producer began with a few soft questions, letting her settle in, letting her spin her tale of woe. Sahna spoke eloquently about her disappointment in her community, her shock at their betrayal. Then the producer's tone shifted. "Sahna," he said, his voice neutral, "we've been talking to some other people in the neighborhood, some of your old friends, and a few other names have come up. Do Do you remember the Sharma family from a few years back? The ones whose catering business failed? Sana's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. I don't recall the details. Our sources seem to recall them quite clearly. The producer pressed on, his voice still calm but now with an edge of steel. They say you made a comment at a wedding that destroyed their reputation, a comment about their kitchen. People gossip, Sana said, waving her hand dismissively. You cannot believe everything you hear. Okay, the producer said, nodding slowly. What about the Mehra family? Their daughter's engagement. We have 3 separate sources, Sana, who claim you started a rumor that led to it being called off. Do you deny that? The color was draining from Sana's face. This was not how the interview was supposed to go. This was not the script. Her eyes darted from the producer to the camera, and for the first time, she seemed to realize it was not her friend. It was an unblinking, merciless eye, and it was there to record her execution. He kept going, name after name, incident after incident. It was a meticulous, chronological dismantling of her entire life's work of manipulation. He presented her with her past, not as she remembered it, but as her victims did. The camera zoomed in, capturing every twitch of her eye, the tightening of her jaw, the beads of sweat forming on her upper lip. The regal matriarch was gone. In her place was a cornered, panicked animal, finally trapped by the truth. The final blow was a piece of audio. The producer pulled out a tablet. Sana, we have one last thing. This is a recording from a phone call you made last week. He played the audio. It was Sahna's voice, speaking to Mrs. Sharma, her new ally, and on the recording she was laughing. She was laughing and bragging about how easily the producers were fooled, how they believed every word she said. She was coaching Mrs. Sharma on how to cry on cue for her next interview, telling her, the more tears, the more they will believe us. The audience loves a suffering woman. The sound of her own voice, her own cackling, manipulative words, filled the silent room. It was undeniable. It was monstrous. It was the truth. Sana sat there frozen, utterly exposed. The queen had been stripped bare in her own throne room. There were no more lies to tell, no more narratives to spin. The producer simply asked, "Do you have any comment on that, Sana?" She had nothing. She just stared into the camera lens, her face a hollow mask of defeat. In that moment, she was not just a neighborhood pariah, she was a global one. Her carefully constructed victim narrative had not only failed, it had backfired so spectacularly that it had exposed her as a fraud to the entire world. She hadn't just lost her community, she had lost any claim to dignity, to sympathy, to the very honor she had professed to cherish above all else. She had flown too close to the sun of television fame, and now her wax wings had melted, plunging her into an abyss of her own making, with the whole world watching her fall. The ultimate karmic justice. She became the very thing she feared. The neighborhood disgrace. But this time, it wasn't just the neighborhood, it was the world. Did Sana get what she deserved? Was this a community that finally said enough is enough? Or was it the story of a woman destroyed by the very machine she tried to manipulate? The lines are blurred, the story is complex, and the fallout is just beginning. Share this story, discuss it, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Because the saga of Sahna Singh is a terrifying lesson in what happens when a private war goes public and a personal demon is given a global stage. The show must go on, but for Sahna, the credits had finally, brutally rolled.